Alright, this time around we're going to make a health bar. Now, similar to other things that we've covered in the past, like scoring, the health bar is really just simply a number, right? We have a percentage that is full, a percentage that is empty, or a number of hit points, or whatever. But it is still just a value or a numerical value that we can think about. And because of that, we can just simply use a simple variable like a float or an integer. Which one's going to be better? Well, honestly, it's up to you. If you have hit points, that might be better. If you're working off percentage, then float might be better. But really, it's not going to be a huge deal. It's not going to impact how we do what we're doing here. Other than, if we use an integer, we might have to convert before we do some of the other things with our hit bar, or our health bar, I mean. So, we'll go ahead and start. I'll make myself a empty game object. Okay, and this one is going to be my game manager. Now, actually instead of that, I'm going to make this. I'm going to call this. I'm going to make something else. I'm going to call it player. Make a capsule. I'll call this player. Now, the reason I might want to do this instead is that the health is relative to the player, right? So if we have the player controls own health, we don't have to have that game manager doing it for us. Now the game manager might need to draw it to the screen, or we could have the player draw it to the screen, the FSM on the player. Either way, it's not going to be a huge problem. It's just how we do it should be kind of consistent. And the reason I would say put it on the player over controlling it by the game object, or whatever this thing is, this is going to be my game manager, by a game manager would be that other objects might have health as well, and we can't control them all in one place. So you might want each one to control their own health. Alright, so we're going to say the player this time is controlling their health. So I'm going to add an FSM to this guy. And in this FSM, we're not really going to do much at all with it, right? Beyond just create a variable called health. Now we don't want to create this as a global variable unless we're going to take this player between scenes, and that health needs to carry over. In that case, you might want to go ahead and make it a global variable for the player to be able to look at. But I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to say this player is always in the scene, and all we're going to do is just import, or not import, but load and unload objects from the scene, and everything's going to work that way. So I'm just going to create a variable inside this FSM, and I'll call it health. I'm going to make it a float just to make it a little bit easier to work with. Again, the only difference between using a float and integer really has to do with how we're going to use it to draw it to the screen, and the float's going to be easier because most things look for floats, and all we'd have to do to change from an integer is just convert the int to a float. Right, so we have health now. There it is. Maybe I'll make this FSM, this one, I'll just call this attributes. Alright, attribute. Let's try that one more time. Attributes. And really all I'm going to do with this one is just kind of put a bunch of stuff on here. Like if this guy was, like, let's say we're playing an RPG game, right? He's got strength and agility and fighting ability and all this different crap, right? We just stick that all in here. Now really, you'd probably want to do that another way, but because we're using Playmaker, this here is going to work just fine for us. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and stick health there. I'll just call this, I call it attributes, and we're not going to do much with the states, although what you may want to do is say in this attributes thing is like it's measuring the health, and like once the health gets to 0, go ahead and kill the player. Problem with this is if we're having to do it every frame, right? We do it every frame and we say, hey, is the health 0? Nope. Okay, continue on. And then it's just going to have to check that every frame. We may not want to do that, just like we don't want to update the score every frame if it's not changing, right? So we're not going to do that yet. We'll have some other thing that's going to control how we die, but it's not just going to get set up right away. But there we go. We've got our health. Let's just initialize our health and say you got 100% health or 100 health, right? And there we go. Now to make this from getting super complicated, I'm going to find my camera so I can. There we go. Let's do this. Make you at 0, 0, 0. There, I can see my guy. Now, what we're going to do is um, just make this health go down, right? Like anytime you have something that needs to make the health go down, just lower it. Excuse me. For instance, if an enemy ran into you and it's supposed to take 10 health every time it runs into you, you'd have some FSM that probably on the enemy that says, "Hey, I collided with the player. Tell the player to take 10 health away, or rather just take 10 health away from the player's health." Okay, but we're not going to focus on that aspect today. We're going to focus mostly on how we can display health on our screen. Right now, health is 100, and we can use a UI object to display that. Okay, we've got text. We could make this as a text object, right? We just say, "Hey, text, give me a fixed number of health." We can display that. The problem with that is it's text, right? A lot of times we want to see a health bar. That way we don't know the number. Or we can just quickly glance at it and say, "Yep, it's mostly red, I'm mostly dead." Right? We could probably do it with an image and just kind of change that image over time. We can do it with a lot of these different things because a lot of them are just kind of made up of the same stuff. They're just kind of prefabbed and put in here all together. The ones that I would look at first are the slider and the scroll bar because those kind of have the element already baked into it. Right? I'm going to go with the slider this time. Right? And I'm just going to set my slider up in my scene really quick. There's my canvas. My slider, I'm just going to extend its anchor points out. Maybe I'll do it up to the upper left hand corner up here. Go away. Actually, this is going to be the upper right hand corner because I'm looking at this backwards. There we go. So there's my health bar. Okay, and we see, but right now it's got that little ball right there, right? Well, what that is this slider is actually a slider, right? We can actually, if I were to press play, click and grab it to change it. This would be like, say, "Hey, turn my volume up," right? That's what this sort of scroll bar or this slider might be used for. But we're going to repurpose it, okay? So instead of doing that, well, we don't really need that handle. So if we come into our hierarchy, open up our slider, we've got this fill area and our handle slide area and a handle. Right? And we really don't need any of this, right? We don't need this handle slide area. I'm just going to totally get rid of that. All right, so I'm just going to select it and go away. And that leaves us our fill. Okay, notice the fill is not just simply this background area. It is this other item. Let me turn up the value a little bit. See that? There's a different color. All right, so our slider script here has things that we can play. It says you must have a graphic target in order to use color transition. I'm not going to use any transition, so I'll set that to none. Right? And then we have navigation. Okay, it works. Visualize. Handle rectangle. Well, we're not using a handle. Transition. Well, an interactable. Even though we took that handle away, we can still click and drag that back and forth. Okay, it's still interactable. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off as well. Okay, now I can still change it here, but I press play, and now I can't change it there because it is not interactable. All right, and really this is pretty much all we need to do, except we have to figure out how to change this value using our FSM. Now I was trying this earlier, and it wasn't necessarily working for me, but a simple way that I would imagine to do it would be to simply just where we go, variables, health, get the value of this health here, and then make the value of our slider be equal to the value of that health. And the ways we would do that is kind of doesn't work. Okay, there are some specific UI actions that we can get from the Hutong website. So if we come into the interwebs, we type in Hutong. I think that's them, Hutong Games. Come in here and we look under the, is it a wiki or is it a manual? Yeah, wiki, custom actions or add-ins. I think it's custom actions. Okay, we need to find actually categories. I don't think this is it. We need the, is this custom actions? Custom. We need the add-ons. That's the one we wanted. And at the very top, we should see Unity UI. This is for the UI system that we have now. Okay, and if we look in here, these are the different, you can also go in the ecosystem to find it there. But it gives you a couple different actions that are already set up that we can use, right? That actually work. I've used them. I might actually have them still, but I tried to do it this other way. So let's take a look at the other way of doing it. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to use the game manager to update my health. I'm going to have my player take that along with them. But I will use this game manager to update this bar. Okay, and so with my game manager, I'll make a new FSM and call this one, like, I don't know, UI control. So this UI control would control everything. I'd also put my score in here and probably, update health or whatever. And so that way, say my guy, my player, took some damage, his health went down, we'd come in here and say, okay, update health. Alright, so add state and call it update health. Right, and in here, what we should do, it should be relatively simple to just simply fill in. I'm going to go ahead and lock this so I can keep it up. Fill in the value of this, where'd it go? Slider. Right, we got the slider value here. So if I drag that into my state here and do a set property, look for the property we want to set. Hey, look at that, a value. And I would think that would do it, but it doesn't. I'm going to try it one more time just to see that it indeed does not do it. But right now we can see my value as 0.514. I'm going to say okay. We're just going to wait. We're just say finished. So it comes in here right away and sets the value to 0. And we'd expect this to go to 0. But if I press play, oh hey, check that out. It actually worked this time. Not quite sure why, but it did. Well, that's fantastic. Well, maybe it will work this time. Alright, so I guess that's what we do then. Right, we're going to set the property of this value to be equal to a number. Maybe the problem is maybe the reason it's working is because I'm using a constant instead of trying to call from a variable. Okay, but let's just pretend I'm going to do it from a variable. So I'm going to say, hey, I need to get that health, and we're going to do that with the state machine get FSM float, or let's say whatever damaged me, or maybe I would call and tell this guy my float, but I'm going to say get FSM float, right, and that's going to get the float value from some other object's FSM. Right, I'm going to say use owner. I'm going to specify the game object that this FSM is on. Okay, it's going to be the player. What's the FSM name? Well, it's in the attributes. What variable am I getting? Oh, it's health. And I'm going to store that in a local variable called health. Okay, and we would do that, say, once every time we want it to update. In this case, it's only going to happen once. Okay, and then we're just going to say, instead of setting it to be this value, set it to be the value of health. And there we go. So if we press play now, there we go. We say, wait a minute, it looks like it's not 100%. Well, that's just simply because of how the slider system works. Okay, because we had the handle's supposed to cover that, so it looks like it's 100. All we need to do is go into our fill area, and then just make it actually take up that entire area. There we go. Oh, that looks great. Look at that. Yay. My health's at 100%. But just to make sure it is working, let's do this. Let's go ahead and turn every frame on, and then we're just going to, instead of that, I'm going to do a float. I'm just going to subtract. So I'm going to say, okay, whatever health is at, I'm going to preload it with 100. Oops. Health 100. So I got that local health variable. I initialize it at 100. I'm just going to subtract 10 every frame per second. And what we should see is my slider slowly going down. What's going on? My slider's shrinking. Yep. So you want to kind of play with that to make it not shrink, but we won't worry about that. We'll just get it working. So now we take our health, we subtract 10 from it every frame, and then we'll just keep updating it, so this should just shrink. So let's see. Oh, I'm adding 10 to it. That's not going to work. Let's add negative 10 to it. That's going to do it. So now we say, okay, play. Wait, why is it still pretty high? Well, the reason this is because if we go back to our slider, the maximum value is 1. Okay, so that means anytime it's above 1, it's going to be 100%. So actually we need to change this to be 100. Now it should travel through the range. Okay, press play. There we go. Oh yeah. So wait a minute. You could do a timer with this. You could do any number of this. All this is just simply a number changing, and it's updating a visual element. Okay, so this could be score. This could be like a time fuse, a timer, your health, the amount of energy you have in your laser sword, or whatever. Right? We're just having a number, changing the number, and then changing something that's visual based on that number. Okay, so instead of just decreasing it over time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say remove this action, and I'm going to get this from the player. Okay, on the player, I'll unlock that. So I'll select my player, look at his attributes, and we'll say okay, add a state. We'll call this damage state, or take damage. Alright, and then we'll have an event. It's called take damage. There we go. We'll mark it as global. That way, if something runs into us, it can tell us to take damage. Alright, and when we take global transition, we take damage. We do this. We change this float value. I mean, I guess technically we want the enemy to say, "Hey, take this much damage," and it'd give us a number. We're going to pretend that's happening, so we're going to say, okay, we're going to change health by, really we'd fill it in with the amount of damage we received, but instead I'm just going to say it's always going to be 10. Alright, so I decrease my health value by 10, and then when I'm done with that, I'm going to go back into here, and then I'm going to say, hey, go ahead and tell my game manager, okay, and tell my game manager to take damage, or that I took damage. So I'm going to send an event. Instead of broadcasting it to everybody, because I would broadcast it to myself, I'm going to be very specific and say, hey, it needs to go to a specific game object's FSM. So I'll specify the game object to be that game manager. What FSM? Well, the FSM that I didn't name. What event are we going to send? We'll go ahead and just use this take damage as well. Alright. And so there we go. We just say, okay, hey, I took damage. Or maybe I could call this took damage instead to not be confused. Alright, so I'll come into the game manager now. Instead of doing a finished event, I'm just going to delete that. And I'm going to say, hey, anytime we get this, I took damage, go ahead and update this. Alright, so if I press play right now, nothing's going to happen. I'm just going to be at, well, should be at full health, hopefully. The reason it's not is because I didn't set it, so it's in the sliders already set at 1, so let's go ahead and turn that all the way up. There we go. Press play. There we go. Nothing's happening. That's because nothing is happening. But here we got our player. So let's make our player take damage over time. So I'm just going to focus in on it, and I'm just going to get some balls, some let's see, spheres, and we're going to say, okay, every time you run into the player, tell it to take damage. So I'm going to add an FSM on my sphere here. We'll call this big rock. Okay, every time a big rock hits my player, it should take damage. So we're going to say every time we collide, physics, collision event, every time I collide with something tagged the player, go ahead and go somewhere to make it cause him to have damage. So I'll say collide. So we wait to hit the player. When we hit the player, leave this state through the collide event, go to state 2, and we're going to tell him to take damage. Okay, so we're going to do state machine, send event. Alright, and then we'll be done, and we'll just go back, because this rock doesn't necessarily just die, it just gives me damage, and it continues on its way. Alright, the other thing we're going to want to do is remember the thing we ran into. It's just going to make it easier. So we're going to remember the thing we ran into. We're going to store it in a variable. This is all local variables. Call it player. And then we're going to say, hey, send an event to a game object FSM. What game object? Oh yeah, you remember that thing we hit? Yeah, that thing. What FSM are we sending it to? Oh, we can't do it this way. We actually have to type in the FSM name, which happens to be attributes. So I'm going to copy and paste that. Big rock says send an event to the thing that we ran into is FSM called attributes. And what event do we want to send? We want to send that take damage event. Alright? And then we'll go back and wait. What does this say? It's giving me an error. Error loading state event target. I wonder if that was just simply left over because it wasn't filled yet. Alright, we'll go back to Playmaker. And I'm just going to duplicate this, a couple times. That way you can see I'm taking a number of damages. Damage. I'm going to just take all these just off them, otherwise they're going to stack up on top of my guy. So I press play, and as the rocks hit him, he should take damage. Oh, we've got to make sure they can fall, so I'll add physics, rigid body, there we go. Now we press play. Now they'll fall on my guy. Boink, 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 boink. Oh, look at that. I took damage. So that there is a health bar. That's how we can control, how we can have our peoples have health, and how we can display it on screen. And for our purposes today, that's it.